What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Quantum Resistant Ledger channel, your information superhighway into the world of post-quantum digital asset security. In today's video, we're going to be diving into some of the misconceptions around Bitcoin's ability to hard fork, soft fork, moving forward, and we're going to go through a few of these questions. My name is Ryan. I am the Director of Advocacy here at the QRL. I will be your co-host today, and I'm joined by our Director of Outreach, Strike. It's good to have you back on another YouTube episode.
Sounds good. Rock and roll.
Cool. We good to dive into a few questions. I know we've pulled some internally from our team and just from the community, but you get to answer some questions here on some of the misconceptions.
Yeah, let's do that.
Perfect. Well, really, I want to kind of dive into some of these questions and kind of frame it with there has been talk from different people in the industry over the years, whether it be more recently or even a few years back. So like, for example, Andreas Antonopoulos, a few years back when he was asked a question on the quantum threat, he answered with, hey, we can easily migrate to another algorithm. Other people have said things similar to that more recently, or at least given kind of a, throw to the side type of answer. Some people have answered it differently than others. But what I want to dive into first is Bitcoin developers have already planned for this. I want to ask that question of when someone says, hey, with the quantum threat coming up, developers have already planned for this. I want to ask you, when you hear that response to the quantum threat, what would you say in response to that?
Sure. So that's a good question. I've heard that narrative a few times in social media. I guess first off, my first instinct is where is the evidence that, something that like this has been planned for? I don't see, there's nothing in the code. And given the fact that the problem itself is based on the addressing structure, not some sort of sub-function within the code or a component of the node's, an ancillary component of the node's code. The problem itself is the addressing structure. It's like your engine, the engine of your car. It has a hairline fracture. It's running. At some point in the future, there's a statistical chance that you could experience a problem. You're not going to be able to fix it with a fresh coat of paint. If planning for means discussion, there has been discussion around early discussions, I think like 3 years ago or so, where developers were talking about using LAMPort signatures, which is a one-time signature scheme. But as it exists today, there's nothing in the Bitcoin code that has that compatibility. So if planning for equals talk, then planning for, I guess, that equals true. But if anything more than talk, then false.
Yeah, can we dive into, based on that, let's dive into both hard fork and soft fork misconceptions. I know kind of maybe you can go through either one first and then dive into the other, but let's dive a little bit into one and then the other of what the misconceptions around each of those are. You can dive into either or first, doesn't matter which one.
Sure. So I'm going to prefix my answers with nothing really is impossible.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think everyone in the crypto community has to give credit to the ingenuity of developers, that have been working on this technology. Bitcoin itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Blockchain. And there's always this tug and war of what's possible versus engineer, software developer ingenuity. So these are my opinions. There are always new developments being made and new discoveries and new ways of doing things. Bitcoin being the prime example. as representative of blockchain. So, but one of the real common narratives that I hear is Bitcoin will just hard. Bitcoin will just soft fork. And it's usually soft fork or hard fork to something that's post-quantum secure. And the way that it's said is usually pretty casually. It's just it's just drop in this module. Suddenly quantum secure. But let's talk about this problem for just a moment. First off, what's the difference between hard fork and soft fork? A soft fork is typically something as simple as just an upgrade to a node that remains backward compatible with other nodes and does not require a new chain to be created. An example might be SegWit, native SegWit for Bitcoin. That did not require a new chain. That was just a modification to the address of the transaction. So a hard fork is when you have a new chain that gets split off from the existing chain, and then you essentially end up with new chains. In some cases, you could even start the chain off with zero at Genesis block, depending on how you do it. But that's essentially the difference. Is soft fork equals same chain, hard fork equals a new chain. So, okay, soft fork. What would a post-quantum secure Bitcoin soft fork potentially look like? Okay. As I mentioned, they've been talking about landport signatures a few years ago. Let's say you were able to build in a post-quantum secure module into the Bitcoin software. You'd be able to just upgrade your node, right? And then you'd be able to receive asymmetric addresses, public key ECDSA addresses, the normal Bitcoin addresses, and you'd also be able to receive post-quantum secure addresses. That doesn't really solve the problem because, as in my earlier example, SegWit and native SegWit, these are all different ways of doing a transaction, but it's all still Bitcoin. And if it's all still Bitcoin, it's all tied into the same pricing mechanism. It's all considered consciously to be the same. So, and that's not to mention that trying to put together a post-quantum secure version of Bitcoin on the world's largest cryptocurrency with a market cap that exceeds General Motors, being able to reach some sort of distributed and an intelligent and tested and workable consensus on something that is so large and exists everywhere, getting everyone to agree on what this looks like. And I've said this before, that type of effort would likely be unprecedented in the blockchain community, tremendously difficult. So I think a soft fork is really out of the question because the problem is the addresses. The addresses are susceptible to Shor's algorithm, which can run on quantum computers, which are based on factorization. A sufficiently powerful quantum computer would be able to take a public key and generate a private key and then be able to spend transactions from a wallet. So it's not just, we're not just trying to change the color of, a button here or, add some additional functionality. The addresses themselves are the problem. And this is all because of ECDSA, which is wonderful against classical computers. I was reading the other day and doing some math, and I think classical computers would take essentially something like 1.5 or 1.6 billion years on average in order to break a 256-bit Bitcoin ECDSA address. So that means it is secure. It has to. But with that all changes when you start talking about quantum and the potential for quantum. What about hard fork? You would take a node upgrade. The problem is that you have all of these old addresses that exist that are not quantum secure, and then you need to put these into the new chain somehow. And I was thinking about this a little bit today. I mean, maybe could there be a way where you could do prove that you own Bitcoin in order to get into the new chain by using something like zero knowledge proofs or something like that. I don't know if that's possible. At the very least, no matter how you do it, I see a number of problems. One, it seems like doing an automatic upgrade. I haven't seen any reasonable conversations on having an automated way to do this, to take the chain and then just make it post quantum secure, and have your private key in your wallet work. Yeah. Second, let's say there was some sort of user-oriented process in which you did something online or some sort of function, and you were able to one-to-one transfer it over. What about the people that missed that transition? What does pricing look like when you have old Bitcoin and new Bitcoin? Is that one-to-one? And how do you get everyone to be able to? How do you communicate this out to everyone? How do you get consensus on the code? And it still gets back to an unprecedented level of cooperation among distributed across the world on reaching consensus on how to do this. It's just a huge problem. If it is, and I'm sure there's some sort of a mathematical representation in which this is possible to do, I'm just not hedging my bets or opinions in that direction. So it would be impossible, not impossible. I'm not an impossible type of person. Very, very, very difficult, probably unlikely, yeah, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that kind of dives into it. I know we could probably, there's a lot of meat to that question and just each of those in general. But I think you briefly touched on this a little bit. There's also, I like the question of if they're able to break SHA-256, then we'll just upgrade to 384. Can you dive into that for a minute, just a little bit more? That's kind of, I like that question of, because it's people, I've seen that at quite a number of places.
Yeah, sure. So, there's a lot of, and rightfully so, there's a lot of confusion around cryptography, encryption, hashing algorithms. Mm-hmm. SHA-256, 384, those are hashing algorithms. Essentially what that means is you have a stream of text, or you have some sort of input, and then you get a defined output. And every time you run that, you get the same output. SHA's those are already quantum secure. Now they're considered to be quantum secure. Now there are quantum ways to go about trying to get the pre-image of the hashed output. Grover's quantum algorithm is one of those that has the potential to do that, but it's not efficient to where it's really considered the threat. Again, the problem is not the hashing. We use our protocol, on the quantum resistant ledger, is based on a one-time signature, hash-based signature scheme. So we use hashes internally. So hashing's fine. The problem is the public and private keys. Being able to see the public key on seeing someone's public key, and then being able to generate, which is what is supposed to be a one-way gate or a one-way function, being able to generate a workable private key from that, which basically opens up a wallet to you. That's the real problem. Hashing's not a problem.
What about the idea of, well, if you don't reuse addresses? This is another question that I saw that I liked. You're safe because it would only expose the hash of the public key, and if you hadn't transferred BTC from that address. Can you briefly dive into that one? As the second last question. I think that's a good one.
It's a great question.
It's one that people kind of think about. Oh, well, maybe this is an option, but.
So when Bitcoin was first started getting used, public keys were you could give them out. You can give them out freely. You're supposed to only use one at a time in order to keep things more anonymous on the chain. And there's a couple other reasons, but essentially the public keys are everywhere. They're exposed. When I submit a transaction, I have a public key on my computer. It's sent to clear text over the internet. It gets processed by a node. The node receives it. That node operator would receive that public key, and then the public address for that transaction, that output, is sitting in the mempool for that node. So, okay, irrespective of whether or not the hash transaction actually gets written to the chain is irrelevant, because public addresses exist everywhere. Satoshi's addresses, those are pretty well known. Those are monitored by the microsecond, I'm sure, by some enthusiasts. So the fact that it would only take a few addresses to get quantum compromised in order to undermine security, undermine the confidence and security of the entire system. So, and get back to this. This is all on the assumption of a sufficiently powerful quantum computer. We have a ways to go yet from all the commercially available information out there. There's still quite a bit of work that needs to be done. There's systemic noise. There's the number of qubits that needs to be increased, and the quality of those qubits. But at the same time, there's new innovations that are being made all the time.
Yeah.
And if you look at the progress that's being made, I mean, it's pointing in a direction that, someday this is going to be more than a speculative threat.
Yeah, to add on top of that, with the progress being made and kind of the direction of where things are going, to kind of follow up, I know in the last 20 seconds you kind of answered it in a few sentences of, why it matters. But if you were to come across somebody and they are to respond to you and say, you know what, I have a little bit of interest in it, but quantum computing is so far away, why should I bother to care right now at the end of 2020, in 2021? Why should I care now as opposed to, let's just wait 5-10 years, see where it's at for things to move forward even further? Can you just dive a little bit further into why having that outlook of no bother at all? What would your response be to that? So
here's my thought on this, and I've thought about this. What do we really know about the progress being made?
Yeah.
We know about D-Wave's quantum annealing. We know about IBM and IonQ. We know about ion-trapped quantum computers. The stuff that we know isn't the stuff that gives me a little bit of anxiety. It's the stuff that we don't know. For example, there's a lot of positive speculation about photonic quantum computers, running close to room temperature. But there's not a lot of information online. A lot of that's secret. And so let me ask you this: with what's at stake, which is essentially asymmetric encryption, which runs 99.99% of blockchains, which runs your credit card transaction encryption, through HTTPS and TLS. When you are on a secure website, you have the little at the top of your screen, you have the lock saying that you're secure. That's all negotiated through asymmetric encryption, which is all based on elliptical cryptography, which is all based on factorization, which all ties into Shores, which all could be broken by a sufficiently powerful quantum computer. So it's not the stuff that I know that makes me think. It's the what ifs. It's the iceberg analogy that I've given before. We see this top of the iceberg, but with what's at stake, what's the market cap of crypto today? $570 billion. What's at stake with being able to decrypt asymmetric communications, between countries, being able to spy on other nations? What's at stake?
Yeah.
And I'll say this on video: if you really consider the implications, I would not put the degree of importance or the security classification of it past the Manhattan Project, but I would probably say that they probably are comparable when you really consider what's at stake and how important information is today and the ability to view encrypted information.
Yeah, and especially as the market cap and as the size continues getting bigger and bigger into the size it is now, but when it doubles, it becomes even more precedent of once it can, maybe people start, obviously there's been talk about, okay, well, US dollar is the world reserve currency, but over time, as more and more money is flooded into the industry, it's like that becomes even more of a pressing issue as kind of the unison of when that happens versus, actually how much is at stake from a financial perspective for not only, people, but institutions, governments, all sorts. So
absolutely, I don't see anything online with governmental progress. NSA, other nation progress from the government sector. I see nothing. I see the commercial sector, which they have to please their stockholders. Hey, we're making progress. We're charging, Honeywell, we're charging $10,000 an hour for quantum computing. Stockholders happy, information gets out. That's what we see. What we don't see, that's what makes me wonder.
Yeah. No, thanks for diving into that. And these are kind of just a few questions. We're going to have a few more coming up as we go into the end of this month, and also going to be diving into Enclave. We have a lot of exciting stuff around with Zond and the move to proof of stake here at the QRL Foundation. But what I want to ask of you, the viewer, if you have other questions that are tied to this, of maybe there's an angle that we haven't dove into, Strike hasn't answered on yet, what type of questions do you have that we maybe haven't covered here, whether you're in the Telegram group, Discord group, any other platforms that you're involved in CS within the QRL community? Definitely ask us, even below this YouTube video, if you have a question. Feel free to ask us what questions you have, because in upcoming videos, we really want to try to dive in and best answer those for you, so that it's we're both diving into questions that we maybe haven't thought about before, or we're just building on the ones that we've already covered. But Strike, thanks again for diving on this call this morning. And
thank you so much.
To everyone watching, we will see you in the next video, as a lot of exciting news at the QRL Foundation is coming up. Have a great rest of the day, and we will see you soon.
See ya.